Hello and welcome to the EDRM Global Webinar Channel. My name's Mary Mack. I'm the CEO and Chief Legal Technologist for EDRM. Today's webinar is offered by EDRM trusted partner Merlin Search Technologies. It's called ChatGPT. Should e-discovery lawyers be nervous? A closer look at our research into how GPT will affect e-discovery by our faculty experts, John Tredenick and Dr. William Weber. We welcome your questions and feedback in the console. Questions will be answered during and after the webinar, and this webinar will be recorded and available for replay at your convenience, as are all of our webinars. Kaylee Wallstead, EDRM's Chief Strategy Officer, is here too.
Mary Mack, I have been counting the days and hours till this presentation. The brilliant and visionary John Tredenick and Dr. William Weber. This is going to be a discussion that we'll be wanting to replay and re-listen to. So thanks for joining us today. Big thank you to today's webinar sponsor, EDRM's trusted partner, Merlin Search Technologies. John Tredenick and his Merlin team are taking e-discovery to new levels. Not just with a revolutionary AI-powered search and discovery platform, but also through cloud utility pricing, the first of its kind pricing model, which was made possible by Merlin's unique single-tenant cloud architecture, which will not only provide substantial savings on e-discovery hosting, but also eliminate data commingling, making the sites more secure. For today's resources, you can, on the right side of your console, see the paperclip, and you can learn more about Merlin Search Technologies by clicking the link. You can, John Tredenick and Dr. Weber wrote a fabulous article that has been in the top 3 on JD Super for quite a while now. Will ChatGPT replace e-discovery review teams? That you may want to take a look at after the webinar. And then to learn more about cloud utility pricing, how to reduce hosting costs and go green in the bargain, you'll see a link there. And then up next on EDRM's webinar channel tomorrow, March 30th, collecting custodian data to prepare for review. There's a link to save your seat there. And then you may also download a certificate of attendance from the console after the webinar to use for your continuing education requirements. And back to you, Miss Mack.
Well, thank you, Kaylee. And I'm as excited as you are to introduce our next guest. Our faculty expert is John Tredenick. You know him as a longtime trial lawyer, a partner at a national firm, founder and CEO of Catalyst Repository Systems. And after selling Catalyst to a large public company, John founded Merlin Search Technologies, a cloud technology company developing AI-powered software for search, analytics, and review. And John, you have a very special guest with you, don't you?
I sure do, Mary Mack. Always great to see you and Kaylee. Thank you for the kind words. I am John Tredenick. I couldn't be more excited about this topic because it showcases our research and the brilliance of Dr. William Weber, who's down in Melbourne, Australia, and awake at 4 a.m. So I'm excited to introduce him. Say hello, Dr. Weber, and then we'll get going.
Hey, John. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think this will be an interesting talk.
I'm going to jump right into it. Back in the 90s, when I was just a trial lawyer, somebody a lot smarter than me gave a talk about the future of the law office. And he predicted that in 20 years, the law office of the future would have a lawyer, a dog, and a computer. The lawyer, he said, was there to turn the computer on in the morning, and the dog was there to keep the lawyer away from the computer the rest of the day. That prophecy seemed funny back then, but it's not so far-fetched. After OpenAI, a company none of us had heard of a few months ago, released ChatGPT, an algorithm that few of us had heard about, an artificial intelligence program reminiscent of HAL in the 2001 Space Odyssey, which should scare you a little bit. You spend a few minutes with ChatGPT and you quickly realize that you don't even need the dog to keep the lawyer at bay. So let's jump in and talk about what is ChatGPT. Over to you, William.
Okay, well, hopefully most of the people listening to this have tried ChatGPT. If you haven't, you really should, because it's going to change the world in lots of ways. But what is it as a tool? Well, from the point of view of a user, it's a tool that's able to, an AI tool that you can type stuff into, enter text into, and it's able to have a conversation with you, answer your questions. It's able to generate text. It's able to answer questions from common knowledge, do all sorts of natural language processing tasks. At the really core of the technology is a text generator that is a system that's able to, based upon a bunch of preceding text, generate what the next word is, and just do that over and over again. So, looks at the 1,000 words before it, what's the most likely next word. So you can think of it a little bit like if you were doing autocomplete on an email or something, like just pressing tab until taking the next word that it suggested, and keep doing that repeatedly. But it's just the model itself is trained on a lot of data. It's very, very smart. And because it's trained on so much data, it's able to do very complicated things with all sorts of natural language processing tasks. Back to you, John.
So how smart is it? The answer you're going to see today, it's really smart. But let's start with what can it do? We could spend a whole hour on this, but just to give you an idea, and I had fun asking GPT itself, what could it do? It can summarize text, answer questions, translate a whole lot of languages very effectively, generate human-like conversation. It could be your buddy on a slow day. Actually, it's used for coding. William Weber's using it these days for the work we're doing that we're going to talk about. Extracting information, analyzing sentiment, even creating poetry. Let me just show you what I mean about the power of GPT, and particularly for those who haven't had a chance to try it. Ediscovery topic summarizes Sedona principles in 100 words. You can see it right here. The principles provide guidelines for the efficient, fair, and effective discovery of electronically stored information. We don't have time to read every one of these, but I want to give you an idea of the power of an engine that can provide an answer like this on the fly. But it doesn't stop there. I said, well, write a poem. Write a poem about the controversial parts of the Sedona principles. And without hesitation, it started writing. In the realm of data, where bytes reside, lies a world where the Sedona principles guide. Through e-discoveries, you get the idea. It's amazing that an AI bot has the ability to do this, but I said, the heck with that. Why don't you write me a poem as if you were Shakespeare? In yon digital realm where data doth dwell, the Sedona principles guide us full well. Through tangled webs of e-discovery's quest, litigators pursue with a learned behest. It can do even more than that, but it also, through another front end, DALL-E that you've heard about, can even do artwork. And the fun of it here is that I went to DALL-E to make all or literally all the images in this program. And I did it just like I did for the dog, the lawyer, and the computer. I just asked it to create a drawing. And I tell you, it still blows me away, but it hasn't stopped there, because 2 weeks ago, OpenAI released the newest version 4.0, going up from 3.5. Just give us a quick summary of what you're seeing with 4.0, William.
Yes, well, one of the problems with doing these talks is that things change so quickly that you have to keep on revising the slides at the last moment. As we've seen, GPT does a whole range of natural language processing tasks. And 6 months ago, or even 3 months ago, the summary description of it was that it was a jack of all trades, but a master of none. That is, it could do all sorts of different natural language processing tasks, but it wasn't necessarily state of the art for any one of them. That's changed with GPT-4. The research results show that not only can it do dozens of different natural language tasks individually or together, but it's state of the art for all of them. It beats pre-existing systems, maybe not in every task, but in many, many tasks. So this is with the new release. Therefore it's more reliable. It's more creative. It's able to understand what humans want better. It's more likely to give you correct answers. It is able to handle multiple different tasks at the same time. And it's also now, which is quite incredible to me, expanding so that it can analyze not just text, but it can analyze images, it can analyze audio files. It can, or certainly will soon be able to analyze video. And we've got an example of exactly one such analysis, the next one here. So this is taken from, I think, an OpenAI presentation itself. This is an example. They showed ChatGPT the image on the left, the image without a description, just the image. And then they asked the question of ChatGPT, what would happen if the strings were cut? And ChatGPT was able to determine, well, if the strings were cut, the balloons would fly away. So ChatGPT has looked at that image and understood it, and is then able to answer logical questions about it, which to me is incredible.
I'll jump in here and say it blew me away as well. We had to show you this, and there's more to be shown there. But I want to tell you that just in the past week or so, OpenAI announced a whole new aspect to GPT, which just continues to blow my mind. There's a new thing called plugins that'll allow GPT to, in formulating answers, search the web, or you could tie a plugin into your own personal data, which it could provide answers to. It can do charts and more. And now they are opening it up to third parties. So there's one plugin that will allow you to pick a restaurant for dinner Saturday night, plan your meal, download the ingredients, place an order on the web, or post about it. It's just unbelievable. But today, we had even fresher news. Elon Musk, Wozniak, and several others put out a post, a serious paper, calling on us to halt development of GPT, stopping with 4.0. And William, I know you took a quick look at it. How did you react as a scientist to this request?
Well, there's been a lot of talk. I mean, there's been a talk for quite a while about the whole issue of AI safety. There are specific concerns about things like job losses, about overwhelming the web with generated content, because GPT does a very good job of generating content. There are more fundamental concerns about the potential of AI accelerating and overtaking humanity altogether. Whether there will actually be a pause will be very interesting to see. I'm a bit skeptical myself, but we'll see. Yeah.
Well, this would merit a whole webinar all by itself. And what do you think about that, Mary?
I think we'll have one next week on Thursday. Look for the announcement. It'll be one of our flash webinars, ripped from the headlines. We'll have John back on with Dr. Maura Grossman, and we've got a couple of other invited guests as well. So, and John, this is a good time for me to interrupt because we got to have a couple questions. So the first question is Chat GPT 4.0 still based only on data through 2021, or does it go through to today?
It's still based on the old model.
Yeah, this is a very good question. We'll be talking about this in a little bit more detail later on. This is part of the thing that the plugins do. Also part of the function you'll see in Bing, and also some other stuff we demonstrate later on. The basic model, yes, only trained up to 2021, but the idea is that people are working on giving the model access to up-to-date data, so that it can answer questions by doing a kind of a search. We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail, but yes, but basically, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to show you how people are doing it today with the recognition that it changes by the moment. William, just a quick summary of how you build one of these things.
Sure. Okay. So, and this comes back to the last question. So, in order to build one of these models, what's called a large language model, which is a form of neural network, a form of advanced artificial intelligence. First of all, you need a huge amount of computing power. You need thousands of CPUs, essentially a network of different supercomputers. You'll use hundreds of billions of documents for training. These are typically documents, well, for ChatGPT, there's mostly documents taken off the open web. There are web crawls, there are news articles, Wikipedia certainly in there, there are books and all sorts of things like that. Up to a certain period, which was a question that was asked before, so it takes a while to build these crawls and a while to train them, and the current ones were late 2021, I believe. And then you train the language model to do this, what seems like a very trivial task. You could even think of it as a game, which is to say, you give the language model, give the computer, 4,000 words of context and say, guess what the next word is, and then show what the next word is, and it updates its internal model, its internal brain, if you like, to try and, if you got it right, then it reinforces that. If you got it wrong, try and figure out how to adjust its weights to get the guess right. It does that over billions of documents, hundreds of billions of documents for weeks and weeks and weeks with thousands of computers. Something like 300, if you had a single CPU, it would take you 300 years to do all of this. And then you develop this model of how human language works. And then that's your base model. And then on top of that, you need to do, well, you don't have to do, but you choose to do typically fine tuning to do things like safety, that it doesn't, to prevent it from giving you instructions on how to build a bomb, or generating text that's inappropriate, and also to align it to answering human questions in the way, or following human requests, and so on and so forth. So,
yeah, let me jump in. There's been
one of these things. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, suggestion by Henry Kissinger in an article he wrote with Eric Schmidt and I think others, that it cost $1 billion at least to build one of these models. And I think the proof in that is the fact that they're still built on one that was cut off in June of 2021. And the upshot here, which could also be part of our flash discussion, is only a few companies are going to be positioned to build one of these. They are the Google, the Microsoft. I haven't even heard that AWS has built one, although they built tools for it. So let's continue on, because I want to build up. Yeah,
we've got a few more questions that have come in that we might clear before we go. So people are asking, how can you access GPT or ChatGPT? If you just do a search on the web for ChatGPT, it'll take you to the ChatGPT page. There's a free for use version. If you want to use ChatGPT 4, well, the actual the developer API is not released yet. There's a wait list for it, but you can use ChatGPT 4 through the ChatGPT UI, but you've got to sign up for a ChatGPT Plus account, which will cost you $20. But the basic model is for free for use. Another question was, from a privacy perspective, does data submitted to the model get sorry, I'll say it slowly. From a privacy perspective, does all data submitted to the model get incorporated into its learning model? No, basically not. And that's a very important point. From the slide we just talked about here, the basic model is trained once on a huge amount of data, and then it can answer questions, but it doesn't take those answers and reinterpret it back into the model.
Or keep the documents that you might send to it. And
well, that's another
to talk about.
That's another point. It doesn't. They do actually have, for auditing reasons, they will keep ChatGPT logs for a while, but it doesn't get incorporated back into the model. Yeah.
All right, let's jump into the next question. What can I do with it? How might it impact Ediscovery? And I confess I'm going to go quickly on a few of these, which are pretty basic, because I want to provide time to talk about what I think are even more revolutionary uses that you're going to see. But for one, it can analyze a legal document. And this is the method of working with GPT, which is you send the text up to GPT in what we call a prompt, like a question. And no, we're not going to read all that, but it's a 502D clawback agreement, which I keep meaning to ask Judge Peck about, whether he ever thinks about using them, but that's another day. So what is it, GPT? And you get a very reasoned description of exactly what's going on and what's important about it. And whether or not Ediscovery lawyers need this, I don't know, but I can tell you that in terms of access to justice for regular non-lawyers that need legal advice, watch out, they're going to be looking here. Another thing, explaining a legal concept like privilege. Classic for at least the first year student, what is required for a privilege log in Ediscovery? Here's the answer it gave. I'm not going to try to read through it, but just glancing at it a little bit, you get the idea that it is a sensible answer given by an AI tool that doesn't even know what the heck it's talking about. It just is guessing the answer and filling in from this powerful experience. And of course, it says it's important to note the specific requirements for privilege logs may vary by jurisdiction, and it should be prepared according to court rules or the guidelines. Powerful, powerful stuff. Well, how about the world we live in at Merlin, which is about keyword and algorithmic search? And we've been studying how we can use this power to make that easier, more effective. So keywords are going to be around for a long time, notwithstanding this new efforts around algorithmic search and our Sherlock engine. But we're going to add the ability to ask GPT. I'm doing this kind of request. I'm searching for issues relating to climate change. What keywords should I use? Well, here are a bunch pulled out of the many billions of terms and articles it has. Well, that's nice, but how about some more? And it can keep on with it and help you with keywords. But it doesn't stop there. What about asking it to build a Boolean search? William, you did. You might want to talk about it.
Sure, absolutely. I think the slides have fallen behind, John.
No, this is the one.
Okay.
No, we're in the Boolean. Yeah.
Okay, sure. They're falling behind for me then. This is a simple example of so a Boolean query is a structured kind of a query. It has its own syntax to it. It's a very, I guess, simple form of programming. And so someone who's new to an area that's trying to create Boolean queries may not be familiar with how the syntax works. They also may not be familiar with all of the possible expansions for a query. So here's an example of one. How do I write a Boolean query that looks for US federal government accounting regulations, listing several such regulations within 30 words of the phrase Acme Corporation or Anodyne Limited? Okay, and the query that results from this is...
Well, I'll jump in.
No, that's fine.
Getting to Australia.
Yeah, I'm not getting the slides anymore. We've got here's an example of a Boolean query that looks for US federal government regulations within 30 words of the phrase Acme Corporation and Unlimited. It then gives you the Boolean query. It's understood, for instance, this near 30 syntax. It's understood how to use quotes to identify phrases and brackets to use the Boolean logic of and or ors. And it's also, we asked it to give examples of regulations. Okay, so the query for US accounting regulations may not hit many documents, but if you list the actual regulations, that standard regulations, then you'll hit more documents. So it's expanded that into FASB, GAAP, SOX, and so forth, all these different acronyms for different US accounting regulations. And then it explains what it's done. So then it says how the query works, and so on and so forth. This is the kind of thing that programmers, this is a very simple kind of programming. This is the kind of thing you can also generate programming text for programmers. So I think that's very useful aid for someone who's wanting to use a Boolean search system. Back to you, John.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, you can also, in your prompt, instruct it on the syntax you use for your application. And so it can frame it using the kinds of proximity cues and the like that you might want. But these are simple ones. Now we're going to move to what I would call the real power of GPT, the power to transform what we're doing. What if you could have GPT analyze and summarize documents? And I'll give you an example. And this is an application Williams built. Are you getting the slides over there, or shall I walk you through?
I'm still not getting them. Maybe you could start off with this one. Yeah.
All right. We developed an application that will connect our platform with GPT. Now, this is lab work, it's not final. But in order to ask GPT about your documents, you have to send them up, which can be an issue we'll talk about. But you send them up because GPT may know about Enron, for example, but it doesn't know anything about documents we might send. So we would start by searching for documents relating to, in this case, the question of bottled water, the sale of bottled water when Nestle and Perrier are drilling wells near natural springs in Florida and depleting the reservoir. So you could find documents, and of course you can read and analyze them yourself. But look what happens when you ask GPT to analyze these specific documents. I'm not going to read through them, but with a quick glance, you get an idea of the power of this engine. It's like a very senior associate. And so one of the ways that we're going to see people using it and will be using it is to take documents that are important and through a click of a button, send the text up or relevant parts of the text to GPT to analyze and summarize. And not just a plain summarization, you can tell it what you're looking for, what you're interested in, what your question is, and say, tell me what in these documents relates or how it relates. So we'll continue on to the next section. And William, are you seeing our slides?
Yep,
I'm back.
I'm back, yep.
Great. So we looked at all this power and said, in our view, you're not going to do e-discovery just through GPT. You need a platform that you can tie in and search, review, analyze documents, and integrate with GPT. And we said, what if we could take these capabilities and send key documents to GPT, and could we ask questions about it? Just another version of Sherlock Holmes done by DALL-E. And so we'll walk you through the process, the architecture, if you will. And I'll start it out. GPT is not like TAR. You just can't send it 3 million documents, have it index them in a couple hours, like we might with Sherlock or others do. It won't do that. Or at least if you sent several million documents, you'd spend a lot of money and wait a while for it to do it. And so you can't just point it at your collection and turn it loose. Also, there's a thing called context, which we could spend more time on, but I'll just briefly mention it. Context is a window of information that you can send to GPT. And one of the things I meant to mention about 4.0 is they've increased that window substantially. Under GPT 3.5, you could send it something like 4,000 words. They call it tokens, meaning a clump of letters that could be a word or might be misspelled or whatever. But you had a limit of what you could send it of a few thousand. With GPT-4, they bumped it to 25,000, which opens the window quite a bit. You can submit multiple documents and have it analyze them all in one. But William, why don't you walk through just the process that we're following and I think is becoming a standard, if that's possible, in a few short weeks.
Yeah, sure. And there've been a few questions popped up in the question section on this as well. So one of the things to understand about this it's different from a typical STAR system is that the GPT model, as we said before, it's a pre-trained model. It takes a very, very long time to train. And then once you've trained it, you don't retrain it. So you're not training it, doing additional training on new documents. So if you've got a new collection coming in, like a new TAR collection, you don't enhance its training on that. Okay, unlike a typical TAR algorithm where you'll train on this document, say that's relevant, that's not relevant, and so forth. You don't do that with GPT. GPT is a bit like, by itself, GPT is like a brain in a jar, which doesn't have much memory and doesn't have access to, well, basic model doesn't have access to the outside world. So when you ask it a question, you've got to show it all the stuff you're asking it the question about. Okay, so we've seen this previously. You ask it a question about certain documents, you give it the document and say, could you please answer this question about the document? So if you're doing some kind of, for instance, search for information, if you're trying to ask questions about a collection that it hasn't been trained on, and remember it's only been trained up to the middle of 2021, you have to show it the documents that you're asking the question of. So how this is typically done, and if you've used Bing search, you will have, the new Bing search, which has GPT integrated, you will have seen this. You first of all take your request, you run it as a search against your index, which may be a conceptual index, or it may just be a simple, a standard index like a Elasticsearch index or something like that. On the case of Bing, it's the standard web index. So you take your query, you run against the index, you retrieve the documents that the query hits as most relevant, and then you send these documents, either the full documents or maybe summaries of the documents, to GPT with the question you want GPT to answer based upon those documents. So GPT will then read the documents very quickly, it's very quick at reading, and read your question and attempt to answer your question based upon the documents you've given to it. Okay, and that's a very important model of how GPT works. If you understand that basic model, you'll be able to understand, or how GPT can be made to work, how a system that uses GPT can be made to work. If you understand that basic question, that basic model, you'll understand a lot about how GPT works or has trouble working in the real world.
Well, let's jump in and show some examples then. We have access to the documents used to Trek, and about 2 million of those are emails from Jeb Bush during his 2 terms as governor. We used a couple of these topics just to show you how GPT might work in an investigatory setting. So one of the topics is about trademark lobbying by Bacardi. The issue in brief is that Bacardi makes a rum brand called Havana Club in Puerto Rico these days. It was originally made in Cuba. And at that period when we cut off relations with Fidel Castro, the 50s, Bacardi started making the rum in Puerto Rico. At least that's my understanding. 50 years later, when relations thawed, Cuba and a distiller called Pernod, a French one, brought suit in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to win back the trademark. And the issue was whether Jorge Rodriguez, the CEO of Bacardi, was maybe improperly lobbying Jeb Bush or getting him to interfere to help Bacardi. So we wanted to see how GPT might handle this. And I'll turn it back to you, William.
Yes, and we should say here that this issue is like a fictional issue. We're not suggesting that there was controversy about whether he was improperly lobbying, but let's imagine that was the investigation we were having a look at. Okay, so what you can see on the screen here is we've run a search separately through our Merlin search tool. We've found the top, I think, half a dozen documents we used for this. And just from the point of view of illustration of what goes underneath the surface in one of these systems, we've taken those document texts and we've pasted them into ChatGPT. Normally a program will be doing this in the background. You don't have to do this manually, but just to show how, to give you an idea of how the system might work. So we have document 1, document 2 separated by separators, and we just put in the literal text of these documents, and we do all 6 documents. And then we, at the end of it, this will all be in the same ChatGPT entry form, but at the end of it, we then ask our question. Okay, so in document 6, there'll be another series of the percentage signs, and we say, based on the above documents, what part did Jeb Bush play in the dispute over the Havana Club trademark? Who else was involved? Okay, and then
let's see how it did. Yeah.
So GPT will then go away, read the documents, read the question, and then try to answer the question based upon the documents you've shown it. So, John, how well did it do?
Well, you can see it did a pretty darn good job. And the fun thing about these Bush documents is they are very real. We're just not saying whether or not anything improper happened. But think about this and compare it to a senior associate you might ask to give you a summary of these documents or to answer the question. It's identified the president of Bacardi by name and knows him. It's identifying the Patent and Trademark Office and Office of Foreign Asset Control. I'm not sure how that fits in. It's matched dates. And we even asked it to tell us to cite the documents that are relevant. Now, in a real world, they'd just be links, and you could go see the underlying documents, and you'll see that Bing does something like it. And it also identified other individuals and talked about the time frame.
So,
And
John,
we can go, yeah.
John, we
go.
have a couple questions about confidentiality. Since one of the questioners says OpenAI staffers have the right to view the uploads, and then we have somebody say, do you think lawyers will send confidential client data to GPT?
I think that's a real issue. It's not the first time I've heard it or we've thought about it. My hope is that ultimately GPT will license those models in a format that we can keep it within our own VPCs behind firewalls so that we can use and control it. We would not be able to update it or train it, not just because they wouldn't allow it, but because I don't have an extra $1 billion burning a hole in my pocket to do just that. But if we can use that brain in a jar, I love that analogy, and be able to send our documents up safely, I think that's going to be phenomenal. But I wouldn't let the discussion stop there. OpenAI will no doubt contractually obligate itself not to use what you send up, not to use the text. And I mean, you think about reviewers today over the web, and their protection is SSL. And it works, but that data is going back and forth to their desk as well. In the end, I think it's going to be, we used to call it price over patriotism. If you can be convinced that this will save you time and money of massive amounts, and that a company like OpenAI will enter into NDAs and the like, will you use it? That'll be a decision for everybody to make. But I'd be happy if we could bring down the model, and that may happen one day. Thank you. Let's keep on, because we asked him another question. Well, what about Jorge Rodriguez? What was his part? Did Jeb Bush solve his problems? And you can see they recognize he's the president of Bacardi, played a key role. He sought help from Jeb Bush to resolve the issues Bacardi faced with patent and trademark and foreign asset control. And then it tells you, Jeb Bush got involved and showed support for Bacardi with sites. And again, point isn't to read all this. The point is to marvel at the incredible ability to present this from an AI bot. We did a couple other questions just for the fun of it. William, feel free to jump in on these, but you can just kind of read them. Who are these others?
The idea here also is that once you've identified, it doesn't just answer your initial question. You can then interrogate the evidence, ask different questions about it, get it in different forms. Yeah.
That's a huge point that we should make. You have conversations with GPT, but as I understand it, when you break the connection or finish for the day and come back, that conversation's gone. So it's a series that can be based on the documents you give, but at least so far, I'm not sure it has the ability to remember conversations. But let's move on. This one blew my mind. It was William's experiment to analyze one of the Enron spreadsheets. So tee that one up, William, on what you were trying to do.
Yeah, so talking about the kinds of analysis it can do. So previously, the previous example we looked at was very much a textual analysis. It was reading text and then essentially summarizing it, or at least answering questions based upon it, which is a kind of a form of a summary. How well can it handle other kinds of data? Well, we've seen that ChatGPT-4, or GPT-4 rather, has the ability to analyze images, but can it handle other kinds of data, like structured data? So here's an example of a spreadsheet. This is from the Enron collection that we came across, and this is the original spreadsheet in its Excel form, but the form that it gets parsed into, or rather scraped into, and this is the form that GPT sees, is this,
oh my
this kind of
gosh.
a mess. It's lost its columns and all that kind of stuff. It's just a whole series of different tokens, which for a human is very difficult to understand. When I first saw this, actually, I saw the text version of it, not the Excel version of it, and it's very difficult to understand what's going on here. But we ask it this question: I'm going to give you a document we retrieved from an N1 production. Can you tell me what this document is about? What sort of document is it? And then just the text, and that's what ChatGPT saw. And it analyzed it based on the information provided. It appears to be a table or a spreadsheet of various energy contracts. Okay, it gives start and end dates, the price, deal, delivery point, and various time periods, and the contract numbers, etc., and so forth. It actually does a remarkably good job from the text dump, but even from the original spreadsheet, it would take a while for a human to figure out what was going on in the spreadsheet. So it's done an incredible job of analysis.
But you didn't stop there, did you, William?
No, so we can then ask it for a further question here. So, so what would an entry like -50 in the above table mean? Which again is a question that a human, particularly a non-expert, would maybe struggle to answer. And it says, well, in the given table, the entry -50 means a quantity of electricity being bought or sold for a particular delivery day. And then it gives an example of a particular row. This row with index 7, blah, 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 blah. This indicates that 50 was sold in July to December 2004, which is remarkable. And that actually is not GPT-4. I think that's it. That's GPT-3. So that's the most recent model probably do be even better than that. So yeah, its ability to infer information is really, really very impressive.
So candidly, we could cue the mic drop there, because we could spend a whole hour thinking about how we could use this, not just for e-discovery, but for all kinds of analysis, research, medical, and the like. But we started talking about what impact GPT could have on the review process. I won't belabor it, but we all know the RAND study that suggested that the cost of human review was 60 to 73% of e-discovery costs. That review market has spawned many organizations here, India, the Philippines, in places all over the world. And from complex discoveries, mashups, there's a suggestion that we're talking about a $10 to $15 billion market being spent on paying humans, and GPT made this drawing for me as well, just love it, to do that human review, responsive or what have you. So William and I started asking the question, could GPT help with review? And our initial results were such that we stopped asking that question and instead said, can GPT replace first pass reviewers? Or more precisely, and this is our belief, could a small team of smart individuals with review experience, but understanding the bigger picture for legal and something about sampling and the like, could they replace the hundreds of reviewers? Taking a process that could run for 6 months down to a couple days, and teams of many hundreds down to a few. And so we started digging in. William's going to talk about our research and how we took the approach to answering that question.
Okay, so this is just a first approach to this topic. So we took one of the standard text collections for, well, not free discovery. It's actually for, well, free discovery and other purposes as well, which is the Jeb Bush text collection. We've seen some of these before. Jeb Bush's emails from when he was governor of Florida. And the approach is to have a description of relevance, and then for each document sent to GPT with description of relevance, and ask GPT, is this document relevant to this topic? Yes, no, or maybe. And we then compare what GPT says about whether the document's relevant or not with the official gold standard judgments that were generated at TREC. TREC is a collaborative research conference. And so we say that what the official judgments at TREC will treat those as being the correct ones. How well does GPT do at matching those correct judgments? And we did this across 34 different topics, which is the size of the topic set for this collection. And so just to show,
go right ahead.
Yeah, so this is an example of one of the topics. And I should say, for this initial approach, we just took the topics as they were produced at Trek. We didn't rewrite them in any way. Okay, so here's an example. One of the topics was about space, and the description is all documents concerning the space industry, space program, space travel, whether manned or unmanned, and the study of or exploration of space in Florida. We then take that and we build what we call a prompt, which is again one of these things that you send GPT. So we're looking at documents from the following collection. We describe the collection briefly. We then put the document in. So that's just a boilerplate for holding the document. And then we ask, is this document relevant to the following topic? We just plug the topic in and answer yes, no, or maybe, and then briefly state your reasoning, 35 to 50 words. Okay, very, very simple initial approach. And okay, so this graph takes a little while to understand, but basically we're measuring each of these dots is one of the topics, one of the 34 topics, and we're measuring how well GPT does compared to the gold standard judgments. So on the horizontal axis, the x-axis, we're measuring recall. That is, of all of the relevant documents, what proportion did GPT find? And then on the y-axis, we're measuring precision, which is to say, of the documents that GPT said were relevant, what proportion of them actually were relevant. So if you're in the top right-hand corner, you're finding almost all the relevant documents, and you're not producing much junk. If you're in the bottom left-hand corner, you're doing the reverse, producing a lot of junk, not finding many relevant documents. And what we find, those red lines are a kind of rough indication of what you might expect from an e-discovery process, from a standard TAR process that uses first pass review. So if you're getting more than about 75% recall and 60% precision, you're doing well enough that you're doing as well as an e-discovery process, TAR-based process, except you don't have to do any actual human review. It's all being done for you by a computer. We found that about a third of the topics GPT was getting into that area in. For a lot of other topics, it was getting very good precision. That it very rarely said irrelevant documents were relevant, but it missed quite a few of the relevant documents. Some other cases where the recall was high, but the precision was not so good, and about 4 topics in which it was just kind of failing. So off the bat, given that we haven't, and I should say, by the way, this is not GPT-4, this is GPT-3. This is the old version of GPT. We haven't yet redone experiments with the new version, but we will be doing so soon. This isn't even 3.5, this is 3, so this is a couple generations back. So off the bat, that's a reasonable, given that we just took a very simple approach to this. We didn't give it any additional context. We didn't try and rewrite the query or anything like that. It seems to be doing a reasonably good job. And also that the queries themselves were not designed for being used by GPT. They were just designed for this other process. So let's have a look at some of the actual results here. Now, one of the things it does do is there's also useful is use this summary describing why it thinks that the document is relevant. So we won't look at all the documents, we'll look at some of the summaries. The first two there are, it's putting out information. So the first one's about Kennedy Space Sensor. The second one is about Smart Air Transport System. Those are documents that it got right. We then look at the next lot. And these are relevant documents that it also said were not relevant. Okay, that's fine. So those are the ones it gets correct for this particular topic. Now, what about the ones it gets wrong? So these are documents that the gold standard said were relevant, but GPT said were irrelevant. And for all of these three, in fact, although the summaries are not very helpful, but if we have a look at one of the documents, we've got an example of one of the documents, or extract from one of the documents. This is one of those documents. The document itself is not relevant to space. So GPT is correct and the human reviewer is wrong. And why has the human reviewer made a mistake? Well, the document has the word orbit in it, which sounds like it's related to space, but in fact is the acronym of an IT conference. Okay, so the human reviewer has just apparently done this too quickly. They just saw one of these apparent relevant keywords and said it's relevant. In fact, all the 3 documents, I think in fact all those 5 documents, that's the case, or certainly the 3 ones that we looked on the previous slide, that GPT is correct in saying that they're not relevant to space, and the human reviewer has got it wrong.
If I can jump in, our working theory is that this review, getting ready for the Trek sessions, was done during March Madness week, and that explains a lot of the problems here.
Yeah. And then also similarly for the false negative, for the next one, which is documents that the GPT said is relevant, but the human reviewer said were not relevant. And for all of these 3, I'm not sure for all 14, but certainly the 3 here we see, GPT is correct, the human is wrong. The human has misread the document. The first one's about Space Summit, second one's about Spaceport Florida Authority, the third one's about a Delta IV launch. They're all 3 of those are actually relevant. You can even tell from the summaries that they're relevant. GPT realized they were relevant, the human got it wrong for whatever reason. So there are 2 points to make about this, and we can go on to the next, probably the next slide. The first is that the GPT here is doing better than for a lot of documents, GPT is getting it correct and the human's getting it wrong. Now, maybe the human for this particular reviewer was not paying a lot of attention, but I think if you've been involved in reviews, you know that humans, even professional human reviewers, sometimes are not terribly attentive. And the second thing is that the gold standard here we're using is not actually gold standard. It's more like a bronze standard. It is understanding, we believe, GPT's effectiveness because GPT is actually getting some of these things that it's being marked wrong on is actually getting right. So probably its actual effectiveness is much better than these results are showing. And the next point to make is that this is only an initial approach, that we can certainly improve we believe we can improve the effectiveness of GPT by rewriting the queries, by restating the topic description, by doing what a human would do if they were instructing human reviewers, looking at examples where the human reviewers got it wrong and saying, oh no, you misunderstood. I'm going to expand my explanations to say, for instance, that anything about a spaceport must be relevant, or stuff that's talking about, and just because it has a keyword in it doesn't mean it's relevant unless it's actually talking about space. By expanding the instructions that you give to a human, you can do the same kind of expansion for instructions that you give to GPT. And we believe that that's going to be an area, well, certainly an area we're working on. So to answer the question, can GPT replace human reviewers? Possibly. Remains to be seen.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that that's why we've been saying what we've been saying, not just to get attention or to tweak the review companies, but you're now seeing the kind of power we're talking about. And much of this was just first efforts, or when we were preparing these experiments, 4.0 wasn't out and we couldn't use it. So you could use 3.0, and there was ChatGPT 3.5. But I think everyone on this program now is beginning to get an idea of the immense power here. And much of this comes through a thing called prompt engineering, which might or might not be the new science of AI. On the one hand, I can tell you that this is currently the way you interact with GPT. And we have been looking at prompt building, prompt engineering. And in fact, William has built a whole system to allow us to test it. But let me give you background and then I'll talk about it. In a prompt, as we see it now, and boy, we learn by the moment, there are kind of 3 sections or more. But first is the general context. We learn you don't want to ask the question up front before you give them the documents, because GPT might forget it, if that's possible. So you want to lay out the general context. Here's some documents, it's about this topic and what have you. Then you put the document text in. And at least in the old GPT, that was one doc because the context window that I mentioned earlier was narrow at 4,000 terms. There are tricks to do with term vectors and the like to make all that more efficient, but that's another topic. Then describing the topic and giving GPT the proper instruction. And So William, you can talk about it, but what William's built is a tool that harkens back to the days of TAR1 and control sets. So you need a gold standard. And for Trek, we had, I like it, the bronze standard, but you had a base to compare GPT's work for. Think about a control set now, where you get a bunch of good documents and decide how big a set you want, and use those, sending the documents to GPT, having it analyze it, and then comparing results against your gold standard. William, tell them more about that before we wrap up our talk.
Yes, so we'll try and leave about 5 minutes for questions. But just very briefly, yes, we've talked about this throughout the presentation, that GPT is very powerful, but you've got a limited amount of information that you can give it. You've got maybe 4,000 words. It's going to expand, but still a limited amount of information to give it, to ask to make a decision or answer a question. The question is, how do you fill up that space in an efficient way? How do you answer the question? How do you describe your relevance, conception of relevance, and what context do you have to give GPT? What other documents and things like that? And so what we're doing is we're building a tool for this particular task of review, which allows you to take documents that you've reviewed yourself as relevant or irrelevant, and then iterate to refine your description of relevance to try and get GPT to answer the relevance questions better. And more of that later. John, should we take some questions now? We've got a few minutes left.
We should. I'm going to put this up as a background for those questions, because there are lots of issues still, but go right ahead. We'll just leave this up and integrate it in, I'm sure, with some of the questions.
Okay, so one of the questions is, will ChatGPT be used by itself, or will it be used within Ediscovery platforms? What's your prediction there?
I'm convinced.
It'll be definitely used inside platforms. Yeah, you'll definitely have to use it inside platforms, and that's one of the big fields now of how to get it to do these tasks effectively. Yeah, and
that's what we're working on. We're convinced that you need a village, as Hillary Clinton might say. GPT's there, but you need tools like Sherlock, our AI-powered Bloodhound, Boolean, review, tagging, the whole thing to really make this work. Mary.
Okay, and what about hallucinations and the making things up? Do you think that that's going to affect its usefulness in Ediscovery?
Making things up. Yeah. Go ahead, William.
Yeah, look, I mean that's a big question. So that's something that needs to be controlled for in Ediscovery in general. That's why you wanted to cite the sources, and you want to check the sources, and you want to do a QA process for it. But yes, it is an issue, but it's a controllable issue.
We had some fun with that. I'll just jump in. And this is GPT 3.5. And by the way, OpenAI says they engineered 4.0 to greatly reduce these. But the problem is you can ask GPT a question it doesn't know the answer to. A book I wrote back in the Catalyst days, Tar for Smart People. Who wrote it? A very compelling and sensible answer, but wrong. And bless more if she's on this webinar, she'll get a smile out of it. But they are everything it describes. In fact, the only thing they didn't do, perhaps, in the AI world is write Tar for Smart People. So I got a big kick out of that.
So, John, one of the other questions is, what resources would you recommend for attorney constituencies for intro-level articles so that they can learn more?
Well, I'll start. Ask GPT for starters. But there's a ton of stuff coming out on Medium by the day.
Or even Bing. Bing would be a better one for this, because you can ask Bing and you can interrogate the documents. But yeah, there's a ton of stuff coming out. Yeah.
Get on the Bing beta program. I'm on it. And by the way, I didn't mention this, and I had a slide on it. We just skipped it. But I just used Bard today and asked it about the Sonona principles, and it was a pretty darn good answer as well. If I thought we had more time, I would have shown it. But Bard, and no doubt there'll be other a few, very few, but others out as well. And they're going to be pushing each other to get better and better.
That's excellent. We have a few more questions, of course, on the confidentiality that you covered a little bit earlier, with many concerns. And then also a question on whether Merlin also analyzes regulations and statutes.
Let me jump in, mindful of our time. Let me say this about confidentiality. We could have a whole program on it. I understand the concern. I was a lawyer for 20 years. Let me also tell you a history you may not know. When the first phones came out, it was the New York bar that immediately said lawyers can't use telephones because of confidentiality concerns or privilege fears. When email first came out, and I was around for this, guess what the lawyers were always saying? We can't be using this. Would it be privileged, etc. And so I'm hearing an echo of it. I'm not dismissing it, but I do believe we're going to find methods to make this as confidential as some of the other methods that we take for granted in communicating. Mary, what was that second question? I apologize.
Does Merlin also analyze regulations and case law?
Well, Merlin will one of these days, but GPT does. In fact, one of the examples they showed on the OpenAI release of 4.0 was feeding a large amount of tax statutes into the system, putting a very difficult question to it, and having it calculate the taxes owed by perhaps a mythical couple with a number of issues and deductions. And the word was, it got it to the penny, 26,000 whatever dollars for taxes. This is mind-boggling stuff. William, did you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a good point. But going back to the earlier point about emails, yeah, that's an excellent point. This is what GPT does. You can set it up so that it doesn't store any logs, doesn't store information. It's just answering a call to an API. It's actually much more secure than email. When you think about the amount of privileged information sent over email, using GPT should not, for this kind of thing, should not be a concern at all.
Excellent.
Mary, any more? I know we're down to our hour. We're happy to keep going.
Well, we'll go with a couple more, and then we'll have to call it. But so here's one: to be of even more use in legal, should or can ChatGPT be trained on specific subsets of data? For example, a collection of mixed, unstructured data from a particular case, or does it not need to be?
There are certainly people out there who are extending the training of GPT on like case law, and that's probably reasonable because it's a fairly fixed set of documents, and you can reuse that over many different cases, but it'll still take weeks to retrain. I think for Ediscovery, we're probably not going to go in that direction of trying to retrain, the huge expense of retraining GPT for individual collections.
So we're going to have to, I think the subsets make sense, that you may send it a series of documents on a specific issue, engage in a conversation, save that information, and you may go on to others. And going back to the platform notion, we're convinced that, and we, and I'm sure others, are working to build, if in effect, a facility that allows you to find these documents, select them, push a button, send them up, have the conversation, and then flush that out, but saving your information. That's why I think you have to have this integrated platform. Who knows what we'll think next month, but that's what we think today.
Well, I think Kaylee Wallstead has come back in. Kaylee, do you have some resources for us?
I would absolutely love to thank today's fabulous webinar sponsor, EDRM's trusted partner, Merlin Search Technologies, for this amazing and really helpful discussion. Merlin is the first to offer cloud utility pricing, which allows clients to license Ediscovery software by the hour rather than by the month, paying one rate when clients use the system and another greatly reduced rate when the system is turned off. By saving on wasted energy use, cloud utility pricing also becomes the first green computing initiative in the Ediscovery market. And we are very excited about this whole thing. You can tune in April 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern for EDRM's flash webinar with Dr. Maura R. Grossman and John Tredenik, discussing navigating the risks of generative AI on an expert panel. And back to you, Mary.
Thanks, Kaylee. And that webinar will answer some of the questions that poured in about the confidentiality aspect. We'll be covering some of that. So thank you today, John. And thank you today, Dr. Weber, and our trusted partner, Merlin Search Technologies, for this wonderful presentation. We thank our EDRM community for your kind attention, and tune in next week for more on the EDRM Global Webinar channel. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mary and Kaylee. We had a ball. I hope you enjoyed it and found it valuable too. This is such an exciting topic.